Imagine you have a car. You fill the tank with the exact amount of fuel required to drive 100 miles. The math is perfect. But the moment you pull onto the highway and step on the gas, the engine sputters. It stalls. You have the fuel, but the fuel injectors didn't release it at the exact millisecond the piston needed to fire. That is the reality for thousands of people living with adrenal insufficiency. They take the prescribed medication, they follow the doctor's orders, but they still feel drained, foggy, and physically unstable. Today, we are looking at a critical piece of the puzzle that often gets overlooked: the clock.
It is the difference between simply staying alive and actually living. For a long time, the medical focus was just on the total daily dose, making sure the patient had enough cortisol in their system to survive. But recent insights, like those discussed in the My Adrenal Life article we are analyzing today, suggest that when you take that dose might actually matter more than the total amount you ingest. We're talking about the biology of time.
This is a concept that feels intuitive but is technically very complex. The article uses this beautiful metaphor of a sunrise pattern to describe how cortisol should work. But before we get into the solution, I want to understand the problem. Why does a person with Addison's disease or secondary adrenal insufficiency feel so different at 10 a.m. versus 4 p.m., even if they have taken their pills?
To understand that, we have to look at what a healthy body does while we are asleep. If you do not have adrenal insufficiency, your adrenal glands are not passive. They are actively managed by a master clock in your brain. Around 3 or 4 in the morning, long before your alarm goes off, your brain sends a signal to the adrenals to start pumping. It is ramping up production so that by the time you open your eyes, your cortisol levels are already peaking.
So the fuel is already in the engine before you even turn the key.
Precisely. This phenomenon is called the cortisol awakening response, or CAR. Research published in journals like Frontiers in Neuroscience indicates that in the first 30 to 45 minutes after waking, cortisol levels in a healthy person shoot up by 50 to 75%. This isn't just to wake you up. It is to pressurize your vascular system so you don't faint when you stand up. It mobilizes glucose so your brain can function. It is a massive physiological surge.
And this is where the disconnect happens for the patient. If I have adrenal insufficiency, my body doesn't do that pre-dawn prep work. I wake up with the tank empty.
Zero, or very close to it. And here is the tragedy of the standard treatment protocol. A patient wakes up, feels terrible, which makes sense because they have no cortisol, and then they reach for their pill bottle. They swallow a hydrocortisone tablet, but that tablet has to go down the esophagus, dissolve in the stomach, and be absorbed into the bloodstream. That takes 20, maybe 30 minutes. So for that first half hour of the day, they are running on fumes, chasing a curve that a healthy body established hours ago.
That explains the morning fog the article mentions, but the text also highlights something else: energy fading earlier than expected in the afternoon. If I take a second dose at noon, shouldn't that carry me through dinner?
You would hope so, but the pharmacokinetics of oral hydrocortisone are tricky. It has a very short half-life, usually around 90 minutes to 2 hours. This creates what patients often call a sawtooth pattern. You take a pill, your levels spike way above normal, super physiological levels, and then they crash down rapidly. A healthy adrenal gland doesn't spike and crash, it releases cortisol in pulses, adapting instantly to demand. The pill is a blunt instrument. By 3 p.m., that noon dose might be effectively gone, leaving the patient in a state of low cortisol right when they need to pick the kids up from school or finish a work project.
It's like trying to heat a house by throwing a massive log on the fire once every 6 hours. You freeze, then you roast, then you freeze again. The average temperature might be correct mathematically, but the experience of living in that house is miserable.
That is a perfect analogy. And this brings us to the historical context. We have to remember that this conversation about quality of life is relatively new. Thomas Addison first described this condition in 1855, noting symptoms like feebleness of the heart and anemia. Back then, and for the next 100 years, it was a death sentence. It wasn't until the late 1940s and early 1950s when researchers like Kendall and Hench synthesized cortisone, work that won them the Nobel Prize, that we could keep people alive.
So for decades, the medical victory was just the patient didn't die.
Exactly. The goal was survival. Now, organizations like the Endocrine Society and the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases are shifting the goalposts. The focus is moving toward mimicking that natural circadian rhythm. The article emphasizes that cortisol naturally declines in the evening. If you try to fix that afternoon crash by taking a dose too late, say at 7 p.m., you might solve the energy crash, but now you have high cortisol when your body is trying to produce melatonin for sleep.
Which leads to the insomnia described in the text. It seems like a tightrope walk. You miss the window by an hour and you ruin your sleep. You take it too early and you crash before dinner. Is this why the article mentions that symptoms can vary so wildly between individuals?
Yes, because everyone's metabolism is different. Some people metabolize hydrocortisone incredibly fast. They are fast metabolizers. They might need small doses every 3 hours just to function. Others process it more slowly. And we have to distinguish between the types of insufficiency mentioned in the article. Primary adrenal insufficiency, or Addison's, means the adrenal gland itself is destroyed, usually by an autoimmune attack. But in secondary or tertiary insufficiency, the problem is in the brain. The pituitary or hypothalamus isn't sending the signal. However, the result regarding timing is largely the same. The rhythm is broken.
I want to circle back to the mental aspect of this. The article notes that patients often feel confused or discouraged when they are doing everything correctly, but still feel unstable. That psychological burden seems heavy. You follow the rules, but your body doesn't cooperate.
It creates a tremendous amount of self-doubt. In the chronic illness community, you will often hear references to spoon theory, the idea that you have a limited amount of energy to spend each day. For someone with adrenal insufficiency, poor timing is like having a hole in your pocket. You start the day with fewer spoons because you missed that morning surge, and you lose spoons faster in the afternoon because of the medication crash. Family members might see you looking fine at 10 a.m. and wonder why you are collapsing on the couch at 2 p.m. It is invisible.
The article explicitly mentions that caregivers need to notice these patterns. It's not laziness, it's physiology. What I found fascinating was the list of symptoms related to timing mismatches, brain fog, shakiness, feeling wired but tired. These aren't just vague feelings, they are biological signals.
They are signs of glucose dysregulation and autonomic instability. Cortisol regulates how your body processes sugar. If your cortisol drops, you can experience hypoglycemia, low blood sugar. That causes the shakiness and the brain fog. On the flip side, if you take too much at once, you get that wired feeling. It is the body saying, I am chemically stressed. The challenge is that current oral replacement therapy is static. It's a fixed dose. But real life is dynamic.
Right. If I decide to go for a run, or if I get into a stressful argument, a healthy body would instantly dump more cortisol to help me cope. My pill bottle doesn't know I'm arguing with my boss.
That is the fundamental limitation. A pill cannot anticipate stress. This is why patients are taught stress dosing, taking extra medication when sick or injured. But subtle daily stressors, the timing of the medication doesn't adjust for those. That is why the sunrise concept is so vital. If you can at least get the baseline curve right, high in the morning, tapering down, you give the body the best possible chance to handle those variances.
So, practically speaking, what does the science say is the solution here? The article stops short of giving medical advice, which is appropriate, but it points toward understanding these rhythms. Does that mean split dosing, taking pills at different times?
The standard of care has evolved significantly. Years ago, patients might have been given 2 doses a day, one morning, one evening. Now, clinical guidelines often suggest 3 or even 4 smaller doses spread out to smooth those peaks and valleys. There is also a move toward what we call circadian dosing. This might involve taking the largest dose the moment you wake up, a smaller dose at lunch, and a tiny dose in the late afternoon. Some researchers are even looking at delayed-release preparations that you take at bedtime, which are designed to release cortisol at 4 a.m. to mimic that natural wake-up surge.
That sounds like a game changer, waking up with the fuel already in the tank.
It is, but those medications can be expensive and aren't available everywhere yet. There is also a small but passionate subset of patients and doctors exploring subcutaneous cortisol pumps. Similar to insulin pumps for diabetics, these provide a continuous infusion of cortisol, programmable to match the exact circadian rhythm of the patient. The quality of life data from pump studies is often remarkable because it eliminates that sawtooth effect entirely.
But for the majority of people relying on daily tablets, the takeaway seems to be vigilance. It is about tracking those energy dips and realizing that a crash at 2 p.m. might mean the noon dose needs to move to 11:30 a.m.
Correct. It empowers the patient to become a detective of their own physiology. The article states, timing matters more than total daily dose, and that is the key. You could be taking 20 milligrams a day, which is a standard replacement dose, but if you take 10 milligrams at noon and 10 milligrams at midnight, you will feel horrendous. You will be sleep-deprived and unable to function in the morning. The total number is irrelevant if the curve is inverted.
It reframes the entire condition. It's not just a deficiency of a substance, it's a deficiency of rhythm. I think that validation is crucial. If you are listening to this and you felt crazy because your blood work looks normal, but you feel like a zombie, this is the explanation. The lab test measures the total amount, or a snapshot in time, but it doesn't measure the flow.
And standard blood tests can be misleading for exactly that reason. A morning cortisol draw might show you are adequately replaced, but it tells the doctor nothing about what happens at 4 p.m. That is why symptom tracking, keeping a diary of energy, focus, and mood, is often just as clinically valuable as the blood work.
The article mentions that this applies to various forms of adrenal insufficiency, including iatrogenic, which is caused by medical treatment, often after long-term steroid use for things like asthma or arthritis. That group is huge.
It is the largest group, actually. When someone takes high-dose prednisone for a long time, their own adrenal glands go to sleep. When they try to stop, their body has forgotten how to produce that rhythm. They face the exact same timing challenges. Their internal clock is out of sync with their daily demands. The sunrise has to be manually reconstructed pill by pill.
It really highlights how sophisticated the body's natural engineering is. We take for granted that we just wake up and go. We don't realize there's a complex chemical symphony conducting that transition from sleep to wakefulness. When that conductor goes silent, you have to step in and wave the baton yourself.
And you have to do it every single day without fail. That is the burden of the disease. But understanding the why, knowing that the fatigue isn't a personal failure but a timing mismatch, can be incredibly liberating. It gives you a variable you can adjust.
We have covered the history, the biology of the sunrise, the flaws in medication delivery, and the psychological toll. As we wrap up, what is the one thing you want people to take away from this concept of timing?
Don't settle for just surviving. If you are feeling those crashes, if the rhythm feels off, trust that sensation. The science of circadian rhythms supports what you are feeling. The goal of replacement therapy should be to restore not just the chemical, but the pattern of life.
A powerful reminder that our bodies live in time, not just in chemistry. If you know someone navigating the ups and downs of adrenal insufficiency, please share this episode with them. It might just be the explanation they have been looking for.